your family budget, your ability to fill up your tank, none of it should hinge on whether a dictator declares war and commits genocide in a half a world away.
So is genocide happening in Ukraine or not? Let's talk about it. If you're like most people, you're watching the crisis in Ukraine unfold, and you are disgusted, heartbroken, and angry. You may also have some questions. Questions like, what exactly is happening in Ukraine? Is Russia committing genocide? What about war crimes or crimes against humanity? You may even be wondering what those terms actually mean. Well, lucky for you, I teach this stuff. So let me tell you what you need to know. Hi, I'm Mike Brand, or Mike the Idealist. In addition to teaching about genocide, mass atrocities, and human rights, I'm also an atrocities prevention and peace-building advocate. So before we talk about what's happening in Ukraine, let's explore what these different crimes are. You may have heard people say atrocities are being committed in Ukraine. And while the term atrocities by itself has several meanings, the term mass atrocities has a more specific definition. Mass atrocities is a catch-all term that refers to the atrocity crimes of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. It's a term of art that has no legal definition, but is often used to describe a situation in which civilians are being systematically targeted with violence, either during peace or war. The term mass atrocities began to be used precisely because of situations like we're seeing in Ukraine. Too often people were arguing about what to call a situation. We saw analysis paralysis where we got lost sight of the bigger picture. People are dying and they need to be protected. A term that has been used widely since the start of the invasion is war crimes. War crimes are often thought of as the laws of war, or international humanitarian law, and can be committed against both civilians and combatants during wartime. The most widely accepted definition of war crimes is found in the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols. The Geneva Conventions include the prohibition of violence against civilians and outlines protections for wounded combatants and prisoners of war, among many other things. It's clear that Russia has committed war crimes in Ukraine. Different from war crimes are crimes against humanity, and they are widespread and systematic attacks against civilian populations in which the civilians are the target of the violence. While there's no international convention that defines what crimes against humanity are, the Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court, outlines the specific acts that constitute crimes against humanity, and the term has been used in other international tribunals. Given how many civilian areas have been targeted by Russia, Russia has been committing crimes against humanity in Ukraine. Genocide has the narrowest definition of all atrocity crimes. The 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide defines genocide as the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, any national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The definition of genocide does not specify the number of people that need to be killed to constitute genocide. In fact, genocidaires do not need to kill anyone to be found guilty of genocide, as conspiracy to commit genocide and incitement of genocide, and attempt to commit genocide are all punishable offenses under the UN Convention. There is precedent to back this up, as the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda has charged and convicted perpetrators of the 1994 genocide in Rwanda for conspiracy to commit genocide and incitement of genocide. The question that many are asking today is, does the situation in Ukraine amount to genocide? The key factor in determining if a situation is genocide or not is both the intent and the targeted groups. Because Ukraine is a state, and Russia is specifically targeting only Ukrainians, the targeted group fits the nationality category. Now, the question of intent. It is difficult to determine exactly what Vladimir Putin and the Russian government's intent is. Perhaps some evidence will be uncovered at a later date that specifically details what Putin's intentions are. Without being able to prove the intention is to destroy the Ukrainian people in whole or in part, it would be difficult to prove genocide. But for now, outside the court of law, one could make the argument that if Russia's goal is to subsume Ukraine into Russia, thereby destroying the Ukrainian identity in whole or in part, Russia's actions in Ukraine very well could constitute genocide. The other big question is, does it matter if we call it genocide right now? How will it change the situation? Some believe that by saying genocide is occurring in Ukraine will lead to a stronger action by the international community. However, there's little evidence from the past to suggest this is true. Even today, the United States government has determined that genocide is currently taking place in China against the Uyghurs and in Burma against Rohingya. Despite those determinations, the US government has dedicated far more resources to the crisis in Ukraine, where no genocide determination has been made. And there's definitely not been any direct military action against China or Burma in response to genocide happening there. When discussing these different crimes, we often consciously or unconsciously tend to view genocide as worse than other atrocity crimes. Some refer to genocide as the crime of all crimes. And while definitions are important, the truth of the matter is when civilians are being systematically killed, it should not matter whether targeted violence meets the narrow definition of genocide or not. The priority should be the protection of civilians and the prevention of mass atrocities. Tens of thousands have been killed in Ukraine. Almost 5 million people have fled their country, while another 7 million are internally displaced. The situation is horrible, no matter what it's called, whether it's genocide or not. So what should be done right now? Well, short of any kind of direct military intervention by NATO, the UN, the United States, or any other body, here's what I think should happen. In the short term, the Biden administration should work with our allies to ensure Ukraine is getting all the military supplies it needs to hold off Russia's incursion. More sanctions can and should be levied against Russia, Russian officials, and oligarchs. There also should be renewed diplomatic efforts both to bring the crisis to an end and to put pressure on countries that have not yet taken a hard line against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There must be ongoing investigations to compile evidence against Russia to hold perpetrators accountable. We'll have to wait to see if the International Criminal Court or other international tribunals will be able to hold individuals accountable for war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. But for accountability to be possible, there must be evidence to show at a trial, and that evidence should be gathered now. In the future, the United States government must dedicate more funding and resources to prevent atrocities around the world. Ukraine is not the only country that's suffering from mass atrocities. Unfortunately, there's far too many countries where civilians are suffering, dying, and forced to flee their homes. The new U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability is a welcome step in the right direction towards building a prevention-focused foreign policy. But Congress must appropriate more funding for prevention. President Biden's proposed 2023 budget is a huge increase to military spending, up to $813 billion in national defense, which is on top of previous years' increases in the defense budget. Meanwhile, Biden is only requesting $67.6 billion for diplomacy, development, and humanitarian aid. As we're seeing right now in Ukraine, not all of our problems can be solved by the military. We must make more investments in prevention and crisis mitigation. I hope that answers some of your questions. And as I said before, unfortunately, Ukraine is not the only country that's experiencing mass atrocities. April is Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month, and we should use this time to advocate to our government to invest more in prevention. Contact your members of Congress. Write to the White House. Tell them that we need to do more to prevent genocide and mass atrocities around the world. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below or reach out to me on my other social media platforms. I'd be happy to try to answer any of your questions.